Hello and welcome to this edition of Crawdaddy Cosplay. Today we are going to be talking about how to use the silicone molding kits that I'll be providing files for with some of my pieces now. So for a lot of details on a lot of the pieces you've seen so far, for like bolt heads and things like that, I've just been cutting circles out of EVA foam, and you're welcome to shape it, mold it however you like. Um, However, EVA foam is wonderful stuff to work with, um, but you've got to have a little bit of knowledge with regards to silicone molding in order to do that. So I'm going to show you how to use the files I provide to you, specifically with the revision 1 of the Space Marine Mark 7 chest piece. So on this piece, there are two details on it. They're kind of like bolt heads or rivets, and 8 studs around the neck there. Um, if you buy this chest, you will get templates that show you how to just cut circles in foam of the correct thickness and put it on there, if that's what you want to do. If you want to go the extra mile, though, and provide something with maybe a better profile that you might like, and you've got the time and the inclination to do it, STL files will be included in the download to print these mold masters. So this is for the 2 you saw on the front, and these are for the 8 studs you saw around the neck. It's a top and a bottom. So all you need to print these up, clean them, smooth them if you so desire. You just need to make sure silicone has a long list of chemicals that you can Google that it does not cure if it's in contact with. Phosphor is one of them. It also does not. The vendor recommends. I'm using vinyl gloves for the silicone today, and the vendor does not recommend you use the nitrile gloves. So just make sure you take a good hard look at the vendor's cut sheet to make sure you adhere to that. But making the molds is relatively easy once you've got these printed and cleaned up. I just hit these with a heat gun to make sure that any pore retraction stuff and little strings went away. Um, they're essentially ready to use. I've also got, you'll notice on that chest piece, the Palatine Aquilia, I'm also making an Imperialis that can go on that. So when you buy that, this is the STL file you'll get to create the skull. When it comes to the Imperialis and the skull, there's just so much detail here. There's not gonna be templates for that. You're gonna have to use this option if you want the Imperialis on your chest piece, or you need to get a skull somewhere else. Well, let me temper that. I will also include an STL for you to just print the skull. If you just want to print the skull, this is the skull I've printed and smoothed already, and you could just attach this to the chest with the wings that will come with the template. However, there is not a template for the skull itself. So we've got our molds set aside. For your silicone, right? This is BB Dino, but you don't necessarily have to use this. Um, I've also got Smooth On makes a good mold, silicone for molding as well. What's important here is that number. This 30 alpha is the shore hardness. You want something in the range of 30 for these molds, especially for the bigger ones. It gives you a little bit of flexibility, but not too much flexibility that it kind of falls apart on its own. And I use the platinum molds just because they're food safe, skin safe, things like that, but it's probably also not a necessity. So we're just going to mix 1 to 1. I'm going to go ahead and make a a mold out of this as well while we're here, provided I've got enough in there. Looks like I do. So these right here will take very little silicone, about 50 or 60 milliliters is all. This one right here is thirsty though, so we're gonna have to mix a fair bit for that one. So what's really important about making this is that you stir the heck out of them once you've mixed them together. So because you mix them 1 to 1, if you needed 60 milliliters, you would do 30 milliliters of each, right? I'm taking these up. I'm making about a liter, just because I want to, and I hope that that'll be enough to fill that other mold. So I'm taking these up to 450 milliliters. Now, an astute observer will notice that I can't mix both of those in the 1 cup at the time. I'll probably order like a larger cup, like a 1 liter size cup later on that would allow me to mix both of these together. So we'll go ahead and take this up to 500 milliliters. We'll go 250 mils from each one. And then we will mix some manufacturers give you a very specific time to mix. The vendor cut sheet for this product just is clear that you need to stir until there is none of this clear liquid is visible. If you could look down in there, you'd see it's kind of blue and it's not quite mixed, blue and white and translucent. And you just stir till there's no translucent left, and this can be a pain. But this is a step that if you get it wrong, you just spend a lot of money on a mold that is not going to cure, and it's useless. So it is worth your time and effort. I usually go about 2 minutes. And I only do that because some of the other stuff that I've used recommended about 2 minutes, but I'm also going to do what the vendor suggests and make sure there's no translucent material visible. This stuff has a pretty decent working time, like 20 to 25 minutes, so it's not like you're rushing to get it into the master. And for these, you're going to want to fill it just about to the tippy top. I only provided a few millimeters. Now the good news is is, unlike water, the meniscus on the silicone is concave down. So if you overfill, there's a good chance it doesn't roll over the sides. It may just bulge up in the middle. Now these, for these molds, I've noticed for this particular brand at least, because of how thin these are, within an hour and a half, they're cured. Or at least cured enough that you can pull them out of the master. So let's set these aside. And I like to just fill in from a corner and let it kind of flow around. And I strongly suspect we may not have enough to finish this one. You'll notice between this mold I've got over here and this one has a larger base. It's only because I had to destroy the mold master to get it off of this one because it was too tight. So I gave it more room and some drafting angles so that it would be easier for you. But what you want is you want that silicone to come right up and come about a ½ inch above . Yep, more of this. This is why you have the fast forward button on the bottom of the screen, so you don't have to watch all this. I'm going to go ahead and use the rest of this. That may get us to where we need. I'm free pouring like this because these parts are always mixed 1-to-1, and I've always used them 1-to-1. So I know if I just empty both of them, it'll be the same amount, roughly. But to make these molds costs maybe a couple dollars in silicone. This larger mold for the Imperialis, it's a $20 or $30 mold if you want to make it. And honestly, between that and shipping, and things can happen to physical products while you're shipping them, and customers may not like them, I am not going, at least right now, I'm not planning to offer to just sell you the mold. And this is definitely a mold you want to leave overnight before you try to peel it away. And what we're looking is we want to get about a ½ inch above the nose there, the surface, the highest part of this piece. Now it looks like we're going to get that, which is good. I don't have to break out the other fresh can. Get that off to one side there. So like I said, an hour or two for these, probably overnight on that. Your final product you end up with are these nice flexible silicone molds, upper and lower half for each one. And that's, so I originally did this and I only made the bottom halves, but I had a real hard time getting a flat surface on the back, which is important for getting it to mate. Now, there's plenty of trimming and things like that you can do on these as you kind of see fit. So these holes right here are basically sprue holes. Ideally, you eyeball it and get just enough material in there to make the part you need, but if there's any extra, the idea is to push hard enough to get it to squeeze into these holes so that it doesn't, so the piece isn't oddly shaped. Also, you're going to get some flashing, is what they call it, where some of it kind of squeezes out between the top and the bottom, and you're just going to have to be ready to trim that off after the EVA foam dries. I just used a pair of scissors, trimmed it off, no problem. But let's go and get some gloves on before we work with our EVA foam clay. Now, it's my understanding this clay is non-toxic. The main purpose of this is I don't want to put my fingerprints in the clay. But what we're going to do is we're going to pack these molds with EVA foam clay. We're then going to put these molds in the freezer. These maybe an hour or so. This bad boy, maybe even overnight. And it's going to make that foam clay as hard as a rock. And then you're going to take it out of the freezer, and you're just going to reach in and you're going to pull it, and it's going to be like a rock, and you're just going to pull it out. The silicone's going to flex out of your way, and you're going to pull that right out. You're going to have the shape you need, and then you just let that dry. These pieces can be dry, or will dry in an hour or so, or a couple hours. This piece, you definitely want to wait probably a couple of days. According to the vendor, it's ready to paint in 48 hours. So let's go ahead and get our pieces in. And it does not take a lot of this clay to make the piece that you want. It's a lot easier to add this stuff to the mold than it is to take it away. So I always try to go a little bit under each time. All right. And that piece is ready to go into the freezer. And these little beads take very little foam. So that piece is just big enough to bother me. That's too much. It's probably just right the way it is. Now, resist the temptation with this piece to make a completely solid piece. You want it to be somewhat hollow. It will dry faster and have flexibility to it, and it's easier to trim and shave down the walls to get what you want. But in order, no one likes bubbles or things of that nature. So we're just going to take a little bit at a time and kind of build up our layers in here. And you got to be pretty religious about keeping this from drying out. So try to keep the lid on it when you're not working directly with it. Now, in my experience, unless you put this in a vacuum chamber or something, there's going to be some air bubbles or defects on the surface of this. Good news is Space Marines fight, so you can always just accent it and make it battle damage. But just something to keep in mind. Don't fret too much. It's just not a perfect process is all. Now around the eye sockets and the nose sockets, it's going to pile up. The clay is. It's going to look like a big lump in the middle, but there's not a lot you can do about that. You've got to get a good, decent thickness on those walls, or they're going to collapse when you try to demold this. So we're going to work this in just a little bit at a time. That's how we avoid our air bubbles. And we kind of need to build the thickness up a little around the top lip, and that's just so we've got a nice firm surface to adhere it to our chest piece. So it should give you a good look of what that should look like. Slightly domed and the top and the bottom, and that's just to give us something that's going to dry a little bit quicker, be a little bit easier to work with, a little more flexible. So we're going to put these in the freezer and come back in about 6 hours and demold these, and you go from there. Okay, welcome back. So our mold's set up for about 3 hours, and we let everything freeze through. I extracted the skull from the mold. Looks really, really nice, but it's frozen, but it's still wet EVA foam clay, so we'll set that aside and let it dry. I've also extracted from our silicone molds our details, and we'll let those dry. It took about 3 hours for the skull. These were ready to come out a little later than that. So, I mean, that's how easy that is to work with. We'll let that dry, and then we can trim up anything, clean up the surface a little bit, and then go from there. So we've also got our molds that we made. Let's get our knife here and just trim it away from the wall. These aren't normally this hard to get out. I added a little too much material here, and it didn't overflow, but it went onto the walls. Here we go. We got another set of molds right here. That one. Oh, look at that. It broke one of the sprues off. So it looks like I could probably thicken that piece up a little if I wanted to, but honestly that sprue's not even really needed. There's 4 other ones. But so I got about 2 molds out of the master. Something to think about. But yeah, I mean that just goes together with that right there. I mean, you can probably get something and trim up what's on the edges there. That's one. And there's the second mold, all set and ready to go. So that was that easy. This is not going to be ready for several more hours, but at the end of the day, you'll get something like that. And I mean, once you've got the silicone molds, as long as you got what you need from that, the masters can go sit on a shelf. Now I've got 2 sets of molds, so I can make these details twice as quickly if I needed to. So now you see how to use the STL files that I'll be providing with the Mark 7 chest to make the details. And also when I release the Imperialis, the skull with the wings for the chest piece, you'll see how we make the mold for that. And I already showed you how we pack the mold, freeze the mold, and then release it. So thank you very much for your time. Look forward to seeing you on my Etsy store. And please check out my Patreon, Crawdaddy Cosplay. That website really exists so that you can vote on whatever the next project is going to be for me. It's like $3 a month, and I throw in a pattern or 2 every month as it is that it easily exceeds that $3. So it's mainly a way for you to interface with me, reply to polls and things like that. So please check that out. Thank you very much for your time.